Welcome to Tech Talks, and today we have Joe from Plannable joining us, and today our topic is how to avoid costly planning mistakes. So Joe is a town planner. He's been a town planner for 15 years. He's worked in state and local governments and also in private. He works for Plannable Town Planning, and these guys focus on really streamlining the process to have one team, one pathway, and one streamlined approval journey. So welcome to Tech Talks, Joe.
Thanks, Graham. Good to be here.
Let's kick it off at the start, Joe, and understanding the process. And for those in the construction industry who are listening to this, where does the planning process really kick in, and what can you share about that process, just to give our listeners clarity around the planning approval and the process, which differs from building approval and starting construction?
Sure. So planning approval is really the first step in the approval journey that you go on. So projects can often need multiple approvals. I like to think of a planning approval as planning is whether something should be there and in what form, and the building approval is how does it actually get put onto the site.
Yeah.
So really the planning approval is the first step. You need to know whether it can be on the site and in what form before you go get those other approvals. And actually under the Building Act, you need the planning approval first before a certifier can issue you with a building approval.
Yeah. So getting the planner involved early is a key component of this. Have you got any examples where they haven't got the planner involved early and you're trying to unscramble an egg, so to speak?
Yeah, so we had I remember one application we were dealing with is the client had lodged an application for a swimming pool in a riparian overlay, which is next to a waterway, and they lodged it with no information. Basically, we had an aerial photograph with a pool sketched on it, and the council just sent them an action notice saying, you've given us no information, you need an assessment against all of these codes, and also raising a whole bunch of riparian related issues with the application. And they sort of came into a panic to us, asking us can you please help us address the council's concerns? And really it was, unfortunately in the end, it ended up being a mountain too high for us to climb, just because of where they wanted to put the pool was smack bang in the middle of really important vegetation right next to a waterway, so the excavation could have damaged the waterway itself. And you know, if they'd just come to us earlier, we could have said move it 10 metres that way. You know, and really at the end of the day the process just fell over because they were fixated on that. I guess in their mind that's where they wanted the pool. And we just couldn't get them to understand, I guess, that council was just not going to let them put it there. So if they'd come to us early, we could have raised those issues, potentially gotten some information together. You know, an engineer could have assisted. We could have got an ecologist to assist with the vegetation aspect, and we may have been able to convince council. It was just, unfortunately too hard to get around in the end.
Joe, do you have any examples of jobs where you've caught an issue early, or which may have caused potential delays or redesigns if you hadn't have spoken to the client early in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one job that we worked on was a vet clinic where they were building a brand new building and expanding the vet clinic quite significantly. And going through the codes in the planning scheme as part of our initial process, I noticed that the planning scheme really called for a lot of glazing in the frontage. They really wanted an active frontage where people could see in and out of the site and vice versa. And the plans that we had in front of us had virtually no glazing on the facade. So, you know, that was an issue that we flagged with the architect, and they managed to work in some glazing at that point. And, you know, the requirement was 60%, which is a lot of glazing. We were about 30% in the end, but that's a hell of a lot better than zero. And you know, if we're at 30, we can convince the council that is a good outcome, given the use of the site and what they need to do internally. The council accepted that in the end. Okay. So we didn't actually, but if we didn't if we had zero glazing, council would have come down hard on us and said, give us lots of glazing.
Yeah.
And they potentially would have had a much larger redesign on their hands. So
it sounds like there's a lot of negotiating and trying to gauge where council have what they want in the planning scheme.
Yeah.
But you're trying to present a case to try and get what the client wants, but you're trying to find that win-win between it's like you've got to give a little bit sometimes, but
exactly.
And not every case is black and white like that. But it sounds like in this one, by going in with zero glazing, council might have come back and gone, we want the 60%, but coming in at 30% from the start enable that negotiation.
That's right, and also making a good case as to why 30% is acceptable.
Yes.
Why the council should accept 30%.
Yeah.
And that's right. It's part of what we do is we will review the planning scheme codes that apply to a project, and that's really that's council's vision for the area, for the project. That's their ideal vision. And as a planner, part of our role is to see what we think council would accept. So if you go to council with nothing, they're just going to come down really hard on you. Part of what we do is try to do that negotiation up front and get an outcome that you can live with and that doesn't damage your design too much, but also what council can live with and what they're prepared to issue an approval for.
Great, that's awesome, Jay. What type of planning constraints are you seeing that are catching people out by surprise?
Yeah, so there's two that come to mind really at the moment: secondary dwellings and short-term accommodation. So secondary dwellings, the government in 2022, in response to the housing crisis, changed the rules so that
state government?
State government, correct, yeah. So you could now rent out your secondary dwelling to someone, or someone in a secondary dwelling didn't have to be related to someone in the main dwelling. And really that's to facilitate more rental stock in the market. What we're seeing a lot now though is people are designing secondary dwellings to be a smaller dwelling, but could be considered dual occupancy. So there's a very fine line. It's quite a grey area at the moment for a secondary dwelling versus the dual occupancy. It was actually a really important court case from the Planning Environment Court in 2024 about that issue specifically. So what people are doing now is they're building two dwellings side by side. The smaller one's the secondary dwelling, and they function as two completely separate houses. They got separate backyards, separate car parking, strangers living in each one that don't know each other. And what the court found in that situation is that is actually a dual occupancy situation, which is a much more complex and harder type of development to get approved. So a lot of the time it's impact accessible in the area where they've built their secondary dwelling.
But if it's an existing house and then they bring in or build a secondary dwelling where they live in the owners of the property live there, and then they use that for their children or Airbnbs or how does that all that?
So that's two very different things, Grant. One is your family living in there, and the other one is a commercial use that you're undertaking in there. So if you've got
if it's rented out long term, that's probably a third.
Correct. So the long-term renting is potentially a dual occupancy situation, and you should definitely speak to a planner about that before doing that, because that could lead to enforcement action from council. Obviously, if a relative is living in the secondary dwelling, that's fine. And if you're renting that out for short-term accommodation, like you put it on Airbnb or stays or something like that, that is a whole different kettle of fish. That is actually a different use in the planning scheme. So councils are now, we've seen a massive increase in councils clamping down on that. So they previously turned a blind eye to it, or it was just so prolific that the councils couldn't keep up with enforcement on it. But now we've seen more and more people coming to us saying, I've got a show cause notice from council. Someone's dogged me in that I'm Airbnb-ing out my secondary dwelling. And they're coming to us, and that's a hard spot to be in because the pressure's on you now. You've got a show cause notice. you potentially have to cease doing that, and that's your source of revenue, your income going down, or you're required to get planning approval, and we're getting approached by a lot more people who are coming to us in that scenario.
So where the state government has relaxed the rule to say it doesn't have to be family, it can be anyone living there, that's therefore putting it into a rental arrangement.
Right.
But what you're kind of saying is that may not have been approved for that.
Yeah, so there's now a tension between what the government's put in place and what
state government and
the
then
state
local,
government, and then what the councils have in place, because they haven't changed. None of the planning schemes have changed.
No. Yeah.
They still have the same requirements. So some of the planning schemes still say that a relative has to be in there. So just because the state government's changed rules, you have to comply with both.
Right.
So it's a massive grey area, and it's caused a lot of angst and anxiety for a lot of people.
So does tiny homes fit into that as well? So like I'm talking about the ones that not on trailers or stuff like that, more permanent ones. Same deal. It becomes a secondary dwelling.
So there's really no difference in the planning scheme. So there's nothing like a tiny home definition in the planning scheme. It's still considered a dwelling, and if that's a secondary dwelling and you're using it for renting out, for instance, that's still potentially a dual occupancy situation. Or if you're putting an Airbnb, that is still short-term accommodation. So that, it's still got to have your radar on that this may be a planning issue, irrespective of whether it's a tiny home or not.
And from what I gather, some councils are hitting up owners for quite hefty infrastructure charges for that secondary dwelling.
So I think since 2022 we've seen a massive increase in secondary dwellings across Queensland. Councils have always had the ability to charge an infrastructure charge for secondary dwellings. They just haven't in the past. But they are within their rights to do so, and we're seeing some pretty hefty infrastructure charges now being laid on secondary dwellings that if you got that approved a year ago, you wouldn't have got that charge. But now you're up for 30 grand just because councils have decided to start charging for it.
Wow.
So it's another thing to be really cautious of, that you may get slugged with an infrastructure charge.
So to avoid or to know all the facts first, it would be, is this way you get a planner in early? So you've got an existing acreage property or property, doesn't really matter, and you're wanting to look at putting a secondary dwelling on. So firstly, there's each council, I'm assuming, has different rules around secondary dwellings, and then understanding what those rules are, and then what potential infrastructure charges or additional applications are needed.
That's right. Definitely get a planner in early. Come and, as you say, every council does have different rules, even for things like the size, the location, who can live in it, whether your services have to be split or not, whether you can have a separate driveway to it or not. All of these things are things that will potentially trigger a development approval, and they're also different from council to council. And then the added layer is, if you want to put a secondary dwelling on, or a tiny home, or some sort of smaller dwelling, and then you want to put it on Airbnb, you are then going to have potentially additional planning requirements. So to save you potentially, even if you start off as a secondary dwelling, but you want to Airbnb it out, come to a planner early and tell them that, and we can get you an approval that deals with all of it at once.
That's a good idea. Great, Joe. How does the quality of the information that you're receiving from clients impact the approval time frames and process through the planning approval with council?
So we see a lot of the time, as planners, we recognise that engaging other consultants, if you need an engineer, you might need an arborist, you might need a traffic engineer. These things cost money. This is big money that you're dealing with. Part of what I do is I try, as a town planner, I try to work out what the council might be able to live with. So instead of, say, a full traffic assessment, we just give them some spare parts, and that would satisfy them. Whereas if we didn't give them that info, they would ask for a full traffic assessment, which would cost you a couple of grand more. So I had an application recently actually where it was a display centre for swimming pools, and the client really didn't want to spend any money on the application up front. So we had aerial photo plans, we had no engineering, no landscape, really low level information. And surprise, surprise, we got a giant RFI from council asking us for everything that we asked for up front. So and more, So as I said, we were trying to ask for the minimum that council could live with and give us a decision on. We couldn't give that to the council. They whacked us with a giant RFI, and it's cost the client thousands more to get all that information from qualified architects and engineers and landscape designers. And that's a really clear example in my mind of where if we just given council more information at the start, we could have reduced the cost to the client on consultants and getting that quality of information.
Yeah, no, good, a lot of wisdom there, Joe. I think that's the key, isn't it? Getting that the right information at the start, spend a little bit extra, but it'll probably save you so much time and potentially so much more money.
Time's a big factor as well, actually, which I didn't mention, is that so the client is leasing that property and they're paying a monthly lease. And it's taken them 2 months now to go and engage those consultants and get that information. Whereas if they just done that right at the start during the early design phase, we could have skipped that 2-month process. And they'd be starting their use earlier, so they'd be getting customers to the site earlier, and that also would have saved them a lot of money on leasing land they couldn't use at the time.
Joe, it's we understand it's getting a town planner involved really early, but I'm just thinking of some examples you see on realestate.com or real estate agents go, oh, this is a splitter block, or this one you can put townhouses on it. I'm talking about the small little developments, which they might seem fine, but there is the risk of buying the property and thinking, I can split that. It's it's an 800 square metre block, so no worries. But it's more than meets the eye when you see it. And what are the things that you find that's why get a planner in? Yes, it might be an 800 square metre block that, in theory, can be 200-400 lots. But there's always there's always more to the story, and what some of the things that you guys look at to ensure that can be split into 2 blocks, or townhouses can go on there, and other issues that you see arise with some of those what seem to be simple.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Brisbane, if you've got 800 square metres, the general rule is you can split your block if you're in a low density residential zone. But as you say, there's some really important factors there about topography of the land. There's factors about infrastructure in the road reserve, and council owns the road reserve, and that's probably another common misconception, is that you can just move things in the road reserve if they're in your way. They're council assets, so council is the landowner for those assets. They don't have to let you move them. So if you and a planner will be able to tell you that. So if you get a planner in early at that stage, we'll be able to look at things like topography and whether you need to adopt a different design. So because maybe it falls too much from front to rear or a crossfall, and you can't do a one behind the other, you need to do side by side, for instance, because of the slope. You need to, or conversely, you can only have one driveway because there's too many council assets in your way. That sort of thing. A planner will also be able to help you, because part of what you do in a subdivision is you have to demonstrate to council that the land is then going to be suitable for dwellings. They may ask you for a concept design to prove that if it's a challenging block, so the planner can assist you to look at those assessment benchmarks and design something suitable for the site that will comply with what council's asking for.
Because there might be stormwater control issues, there could be sewer lines, manholes, sewer connection points, tree protection. like if there's a big tree on the
Yeah,
block that's got
that's
protection, or potential neighbouring trees, would that be?
Look, if they're particularly native trees,
Yes, yeah.
you know, or trees that are on. So council in Brisbane has a significant tree register.
Mm-hmm.
That will be you'll only be able to know that via an overlay. So a planning overlay. So engaging a planner early, we can tell you if you've got constraints like that on your block.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a sewer line running through your property that you actually need consent from your neighbour for. So as part of our early investigations and searches into the site, we'll pick up things like that as well. That can potentially be a massive headache for you later on.
Retaining walls as well, if it's a sloping block. Have you had any examples or stories around how retaining walls, trigger the application as well, or?
Yeah, so we're doing more and more these days operational work applications where someone wants to flatten the rear of their block. Whether they're doing a cut to level it or filling to level it, and building retaining walls around that. And these applications, they're engineering design based, but they are a planning application. So a lot of the time they're assessed by engineering teams in council, and council engineers don't understand planning rules. They don't understand the legal framework around planning. So, when you've got a code accessible application, there are certain things council can ask for, and there are certain things council can't ask for. And actually, I had a recent example of a big cut the clients are doing at the rear of their site to site their backyard and have it nice and flat, put a swimming pool in. The amount of earthworks they were doing triggered operational works, an application to council. So we lodged an application, and then the council information request came back asking us to deal with stormwater runoff from the adjoining property to the rear because it was upstream. But if you had a look at that code, the code actually didn't require us to do that. And because we're a code accessible application, the council can't ask for things that are not in the code. So we were able to push back on that. And I had to escalate that in the end, unfortunately, to the manager of the engineering department. But we got an approval 2 weeks later, and we didn't have to supply that additional engineering information, which would have cost the client thousands. So I think a planner can really help you sort out through the guff of what council's asking you for, because a lot of the time there will be things in there that are not relevant.
Even a 1:2, but in a flood area, where the land levels, there's a whole heap around that as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So so what I'm taking from this, Joe, is especially if you're in the industry and you do a few of these, or you have an interest in doing small developments, it sounds like one of your crucial members of your team that you need to build a good relationship with is a planner, especially, and it could even be for property due diligence. You're looking at properties regularly, but having someone like yourself from Plannable on board that they can send over hey, I want to buy this site, there's something that interests me, what can and can't I do with this property?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so crucial to get all the information you can at the start. You're making a decision on hundreds of thousands of dollars. A few $100s to get some advice about what you can and can't do on the site is priceless. It's worth its weight in gold. I think, especially if that stops you from spending $1 million on a property you can't actually do what you want to do with. It's definitely worth it in my view.
Oh, absolutely. So Joe, as we wrap things up, what's the one bit of advice you'd like to share with our listeners who are industry professionals that could help them to grow their business and help their clients more, particularly in this planning space?
Sure. So I think a lot of the time planning is a bit of an afterthought for people. It's also, it doesn't appear to be the most complicated thing to do. So I think a lot of professionals in the industry, engineers, designers, are lodging development applications themselves. And they're not an expert in that space, just like I'm not an expert in architecture. So, our core business at Plannable really is lodging development applications for people, getting them good planning outcomes. And yeah, I guess my advice would be, look, engage an expert that specialises in the field that you want them to achieve that part of the project for you. So yeah, come to us for planning advice. Well, I don't try to design houses, or I don't try to engineer retaining walls. Our core business at Plannable really is getting good planning outcomes and lodging those planning applications, packaging them up, dealing with council for you as well. We understand the legal framework around planning applications, and that just enables us to really have a smooth process with council and get you the outcome you need.
Well, thanks, Joe. Everything that you've shared, there's some cracker stories in there and there's some great learnings. So thank you so much for coming on Tech Talks. This is Joe from Plannable.
Great to be with you. Cheers.